Classical feminism believed that, the genders should be equal in their rights and there should be no patriarchy or matriarchy in society. This is what classical feminism looks like if I could give it an image, and that's what neo-feminism looks like if I could give it an image in your mind. Neo-feminism, ladies and gentlemen, is an act of war. It is a program of social engineering or mind control, which is specifically targeted at women in order to incite a war between the sexes in a divide and conquer strategy. The long-term goal of this manipulated war is to weaken both genders to such an extent that it becomes much easier for the entrenched ruling class to subjugate both men and women under their worldwide system of totalitarian control. They are waging a gender war against both men and women through the neo-feminist agenda. Why specifically target women? Since women possess the capability of influencing men, most men will adjust their attitudes and behaviors to conform to women's likes and preferences. Therefore, if the ruling class can influence the minds of most women, the men and children of a society will ultimately follow. Both sides don't have to fall for the manipulation. Only one side of a dialectic needs to fall for the manipulation in order for the dialectic manipulation to be successful, because they believe in their minds that they have an enemy and they're waging war on that enemy already. So once one side buys into the dialectic, it's on. The war is on. And the other side has one of two choices. They either have to convince the other side that they're under complete mind control and manipulation, and that other side has to be willing to listen to reason and change their behavior as a result, or there has to be a conflict. Eugenics is a social ideology advocating the promotion of higher rates of sexual reproduction for people with traits and characteristics desired by its proponents, and reduced rates of sexual reproduction and sterilization for those with undesired traits and characteristics. This practice could be described as a main religious tenet of the ruling class, who believe that it is simply the quote-unquote natural order for the most ruthless of humans, whose genes in their minds are the quote fittest, to rule the rest of the human herd. They see themselves as a quote elite class of human beings who attained the highest positions of power in the world because they are genetically superior to those they rule over. Ultimately, this psychopathic ruling class believe that they have every right to decide who is allowed to live and procreate and who must die. The biggest form of eugenics that is being waged upon the human population right now, aside from the neo-feminism agenda, is abortion. I mean, it's such a hardcore war that's being waged, especially against minority populations. I mean, over half of the African-American population's pregnancies in the United States end in abortion. More babies are being aborted than born. Operations like Planned Parenthood are directly involved in eugenics. And many of the people involved in the boards of organizations like that make no bones about it, that they are eugenicists and they think the population needs to be culled. The dark occultists of this world are practically coming out in the open and telling people that they want to cull them. Building monuments to eugenics, as the Georgia Guidestones are. Right on the stones it says, maintain humanity under 500 million in what they think of as perpetual balance with nature. Now that's perpetual balance with a satanic mindset, that there's an elite class that can consider themselves God on earth. That's what that is. That's an elimination of over 95% of the human population. And believe me, if they could get that done today, they would do it. The science of epigenetics clearly demonstrates that human beings possess the ability to create adaptive changes to their gene expressions via changes in consciousness. Genes have been proven to be only a tendency for biological expression. Since consciousness precedes the genetic expression in the physical domain, if consciousness is changed, then the gene expression in the physical domain can be fundamentally altered. What if an occult ruling class long ago discovered how to influence the breeding process within entire populations for the purpose of making those populations easier for them to control? In other words, controlling human breeding by manipulating human consciousness to get the characteristics of the next generation to come out the way the ruling class wants those characteristics to come out. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, human farming. Because that is what the control class, the social engineer class, consider themselves. They consider themselves farmers of the human herd of cattle. That's how they view us. That's how they view you. This is population control through mind control. It is very important to understand that eugenics is not just about population reduction. It is ultimately about controlling which characteristics are expressed in human society. By breeding certain desired characteristics into the gene pool and breeding certain undesirable characteristics out of the gene pool. That's how eugenics is performed. Epi-eugenics is the propagation of eugenics by way of social engineering or mind control, and selective breeding by the very population which the eugenics strategy is targeted to destroy. The people who the eugenics strategy is targeted to wean or to cull is actually performing this very selective breeding process. And they have been convinced that it is actually in their best interest to perform that culling upon themselves. And that's what's happening in our society, folks. That is going on actively as we're sitting here. Eugenics, epi-eugenics, one could call it mind-controlled downbreeding. Mind-controlled downbreeding. Or in other words, getting the human herd to cull itself. They are actually performing dysgenics. See, we shouldn't even be using the word eugenics to describe this process because it means good breeding. It means breeding strength into a society. It means upbreeding, making a society more strong and more cohesive and more dynamic and more diverse and just higher in consciousness in general than it used to be. That's not what the social engineers are trying to do. They're doing that to themselves, to their own subclass. Oh yeah, they're eugenicists for themselves, but not for us. Across the board, modern medical doctors have seen a disturbing trend of testosterone levels plummeting significantly for both genders. This is no accident. Instead of alerting people to this fact and trying to understand why this is happening, modern doctors have been deliberately reducing the levels of testosterone that are considered normal for both genders in medical testing and literature. The war on human sexuality is being waged through the war on testosterone in our society in both males and females. The destruction of the familial dynamic is what this is all leading to. The attack upon the natural sexual familial dynamic in society tremendously destabilizes the ability for people to establish firm foundations in relationships, in morality, in health, and in real education. Entire industries thrive on this social disease.
Today, nearly 60% of all black children are born out of wedlock. Lorinda relies on welfare to support Shaquana, but it's her mother, Gloria Henderson, who gets the check for the whole family. Gloria, 34, has never been married. She was a teenager when Clorinda was born, just as her own mother, Clorinda's grandmother, had been when Gloria was born.
Raise your hand if you're married. None of you are married. Raise your hand if you would like to be married to your baby's father. One. The rest of you who don't plan to get married, why don't you plan to get married? I'd like to know that.
You already have your child to think about, and then a whole family to care for. You know, it's a lot of responsibility. And then you don't want the commitments.
I wouldn't want no man holding me down because I think I can make it as a single parent.
But don't you think you might need help in raising that baby from a man?
Not really. I didn't have a father. My father wasn't in the home, so, you know, it really, male figures are not substantially important in the family.
They're trying to breed out righteous anger through this agenda. Conditioned women are being engineered to reject all forms of the emotion of anger when displayed by a male. From a very early age, they are taught the New Age deception that anger is an invalid emotion that human beings, especially men, should not openly display. Of course, this tactic is used to suppress righteous indignation toward the iniquities that are taking place in our world so that the powers that be can go on ruling unchallenged. Lincoln said, thank you. Lincoln said, you can tell the greatness of a man by what makes him angry. Feminizing the human male. The war on authentic men takes the form of the emasculation of the human male, a process which breeds out the sacred masculine dynamic, which is the willingness to stand up to tyrants and bullies with physical self-defensive force if necessary. The long-term agenda is to create a feminized man that will not ever challenge the state, and to simultaneously condition women to view the state as an all-powerful husband/father figure. The conditioned woman at a subconscious level chooses the feminized man who will not stand up for himself, since her perception has been influenced to see that man as one who is the most suited to survive for the very reason that he will not place himself in danger by challenging the violence of the state. They're breeding out the rebels in our society, folks. Rebellion against the state, a reverence for true freedom, and placing high value on personal responsibility and individual rights are traits that are being deliberately bred out of humanity through the epi-eugenics agenda because such traits are undesirable to the ruling class. Socially engineered traits being bred into the new human include a fear of going against the norm, docility, submissiveness, obedience to authority, and going along to get along, as depicted by the gentleman in this picture. But hey, ladies, he's hot. He loves hot girls.